Morning and welcome to the January 24th meeting of the Citizen Oversight Board. Glad to see everyone today and hope you've stayed warm in the Arctic blast. We've got a little bit of an alternative meeting format and approach and timing today. So we're starting a little bit late due to a guest that we wanted to have join us for a meeting today. So Chief Thomas from the Denver Police Department will join us at the end of the hour in order to have conversation about some policies that the department is developing. I believe due to the nature of those policies, we will likely need to move into executive session. So I'll ask board members to facilitate that transition when we're ready. We were to be joined by Executive Director of Safety, Armando Saldate today, but we have received notice from him earlier this week that he'll be out as a result of a funeral. So everything is upended, and instead the board wanted to spend some time today making progress on the development of our strategic plan, as well as I think talking about our annual report, which is due March 15th. So excited to talk about both of those things. And first, let's get to any board business that we have.
Julia, could we have whoever is board guest identified?
Yes, please. If the person joining as board guest, not on video, would rename themselves and let us know who you are, that would be great.
Or come on video so that we could see who it is.
Right. That would be good. Okay. Daniel, I don't know if you can see anything from your end.
Not right now. I can I think it's Emily Locke from the Department of Public Safety, but I don't know. I haven't seen it on video, so I can remove them if you'd like.
Yeah, maybe let's start there, and then if the person will join back with a named contact, that would be helpful. I mean, this is a public meeting, so you know, procedurally it doesn't matter, but just want to make sure we know who's here if they are a member of the board, for example. Okay, so a few other things. First, I'd like to get a motion from the board to approve the minutes from the January 10th meeting. I was not at that meeting, so I'll abstain from voting, but.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Great. What I'll also mention is that I believe we ran out of time for public comment at our last meeting, and we did receive written comment from a community member. So we'll make time for that now. And Daniel, if you'll read the written comment, and then we'll see if anyone else who joined the meeting here today wants to say anything, or if board members want to engage in the comment itself. Hi, Tamisha.
Great. And just as a heads up, this comment does reference yesterday. It does say yesterday and things like that. Those are yesterday from our meeting 2 weeks ago, just so you all know. All right, this comment is from community member Regan Benson, who's spoken with the board before. And she writes, good morning, citizen community members of the COB. I just wanted to provide you with this public comment today. Thank you for the opportunity. Did you see in the press yesterday that a Black female sergeant from DSD has been terminated after 9 years of employment for deception? That's the story the public is being told. At any rate, you represent the community, me and others like me. Human beings that aren't beholden to the government for honest answers. That's why your position exists. With that said, would any of you have any questions or concerns around investigations through the DPD that result in a Black female sergeant being assigned to investigate a white male sergeant that she directly worked with? This white male sergeant has numerous complaints, and this is fact, that continue to get determined that no department violations have occurred in criminal cases he has generated on multiple women in the community, in where all of these criminal cases have been dismissed and property he's seized returned. It's odd to me how this white male sergeant in the Denver PD is allowed to continue a reign of terror on the community while never facing any punishment or cause for firing, under the circumstances of what I describe, orchestrated outcomes through DPD's internal affairs. A Black DSD female sergeant fired for deception? Odd. Again, it's interesting to me how a young Black female sergeant was assigned to investigate a much older white male sergeant that she directly worked with in the DPD. What is most troubling is this white male sergeant should be facing criminal charges, and he's not. The Denver PD and their command staff are ensuring this sergeant is protected at any cost of anyone's life and career. Fact. I have questions. Do you? Thank you for your time. Regan Benson. And that's the public comment that she asked. She was unable to attend our last meeting, but was had been hoping to, and she sent that comment.
Okay, thank you. Do board members have any questions or discussion on that comment?
What's our typical protocol when we receive a written comment? Is that something that we would then respond in writing or call them, or what is the usual practice?
Doesn't happen very often. So usual is probably a stretch. Typically we do follow up with the person who's written us, whether it's for public comment or not. I believe in this case, we sought to understand the ability of a supervisor to investigate their direct report. Is that right, Daniel? Or am I mixing this up with something else?
I think the public comment sort of joined. It could have been confused because there were two different things there. One is there was a sergeant, a Black female sergeant from the sheriff's department that was terminated for deception, and then separately, and my understanding is that Miss Benson was not involved in that at all. Separately, she had previously made a comment to the board related to DPD sergeants investigating each other, who had been peers in the same district. And so my understanding, my best read of that is that it is sort of two separate incidents or two separate issues.
Okay.
And the DPD does allow same ranked individuals. The DPD does allow an investigator in internal affairs to investigate other DPD officers who are the same rank as the investigator.
So a deputy could investigate a deputy, for example.
Well, on the police side, it would be officer and officer.
Officer and officer.
So usually, I think internal affairs is sergeant and up. So sergeant could investigate a sergeant. It would take very special circumstances for a lieutenant to investigate a commander. Basically, yeah.
The issue regarding the sheriff's department sergeant who was terminated, at least I only saw what was in the paper, and my understanding was that there was an incident where she was flashing her badge and during a traffic stop, and that there was some, and I'm trying to remember the details, but something to the effect that she misstated what she had done at the point that she's being investigated for that. Am I accurate in that?
more or
that
less. Yeah.
recollection, because I'm not looking at it right now, so I'm not sure what the details were.
She was pulled over and displayed her sheriff's department ID badge as well as her driver's license in a way that the police officer took to be seeking preferential treatment. And then during her interviews about it, Internal Affairs believes that she was intentionally making false statements in that investigative meeting, which is, if they find that that to be the case, that the presumptive penalty is termination.
Right, yeah. And so Ms. Benson is arguing the fact that there's a what she perceives as an unequal review situation with the black female sergeant versus the white male sergeant. Am I understanding how she's arguing this piece?
I hesitate.
Sounds, yeah, it sounds like that's
unclear.
the discussion.
Are we unclear as to what exactly she's trying to convey here?
I think a difference in approach, I think perhaps race, preferential or prejudicial responses on behalf of departments and concerns
These are
about.
two different departments, right?
Right, they have different
Yeah.
processes,
Mhm.
and the cases are not related.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that we sort of like hash this out in detail. I just wanted to make sure that folks had time to sort of ask questions about this also, in case people feel like I don't have anything to say on this comment. But just wanted to make sure we opened it up.
I do have a question too along the lines that Rufina mentioned around, like, in situations like this, what do we do? What is the recourse for identifying whether there's a there and where does this land and with who?
Yeah, we can certainly forward the concern to the departments. We can forward the concern to the monitor's office. In the case of the sheriff's department matter, that employee has been terminated already. If we felt like that wasn't fair, we could, escalate our concerns on that for sure. On the police department side, if there are concerns that the board has about people of equal levels investigating one another, we can certainly bring that up as a procedural concern or matter. So, there are lots of things that we could do about a public comment. We could also not do anything about a public comment. Most often in my time, public comments have related to somebody concerned about their own family member and less about sort of systems issues. But certainly, there are steps that we could take if the board felt interested in this.
Well, I do think that there should be some follow-up of some sort. And that's what I was trying to gauge was what is our usual procedure.
And if you would like to speak with her directly to clarify any questions or concerns, I have her contact information.
Mhm. Well, I would not want to speak one-on-one. I would want to speak as a board to get her either to clarify her concerns and not have us be guessing about what it is that she's trying to achieve here. But because I don't want her to think that we just have not done anything with it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm unclear as to exactly where she wants to move this forward to. What is it that she's seeking? She's seeking an investigation. Is she seeking a change in the process? I mean, again, I hesitate to send it forward to the two departments without us really understanding, excuse me, what it is that she's wanting to pursue.
Okay. Maybe that sounds like our next step is just to follow up with her in terms of what she's seeking.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it would be in an open meeting such as this.
somebody chime in here?
I have a question. Daniel, do we have notice of the OIM being involved in the disciplinary process?
Regarding Ms. Benson?
Yes.
Yeah, so she has reached out to the board about a couple of her complaints, a previous public comment related to complaints from years ago that she has not heard back on. So as it relates personally to her, that is something that the COB and OIM have been working to follow up on.
Okay.
I don't see any harm to personally to gather information from both departments on the status of those as we clarify. I think it would help ask additional questions of her. It sounds like she sees an issue and she wants to bring it to the public's attention. That could also spark an investigation as to what the process is or the procedure for people of the same level investigating other officers and things like that. And maybe there should be some policy or some changes that can be made depending on what comes out of that. Also, maybe looking at some stats about how many times has somebody been terminated for investigating somebody at the same rank as well. I think some research is warranted.
Okay, great. Take that back. The board should have access to the disciplinary order. I think that was issued in December. Is that right, Daniel?
Yeah.
So folks can take a look at that now based on the email that Daniel usually sends on that matter. But we can certainly bring back the other questions here. Okay. If we don't mind, I'd like to switch to beginning discussion on the strategic plan. I want to reserve just a few minutes also to talk about the annual report to refresh folks' memory on the process. And if it's your first go around, help you understand what the process is and get a little clarity on sort of the milestones that folks can expect. Short story on the annual report is that it does require a significant amount of board engagement and reading the drafts, etc. And so I'd like for us to get clarity on maybe a smaller team working on that at first before it goes to the whole board. So I just want to make sure we've got just a few minutes to talk about that. As I was not in the meeting the last go around, does a board member want to sort of highlight the discussion and talk about where we landed with regard to the strategic plan such that we might pick it back up here?
You know, we had some very good discussion, but we basically were wordsmithing and also getting clarity on the basic structure of our plan. So we didn't get into the, I'm not seeing it in front of me, sorry. But the specific plan outcomes, perhaps that's what we didn't get to. But we did finish at least the overall categories. And I don't know if, Daniel, you could show on your screen the overview. Right. And so we made some changes in terms of where we would place certain things, but, basically we were pretty consistent in terms of how we viewed our three main topics: the public reporting, the community outreach, and the capacity building. And so I think that's where we needed to go now were the outcomes on the next pages. And Daniel, I'm assuming that this now reflects what we made changes on.
Yes, this is the latest version incorporating.
Okay.
Well, this table incorporates the changes that we were discussing at the last meeting.
Mhm.
The rest of the document I left in tracked changes so that anyone who wasn't there would be able to follow along with what we did.
Right.
For example, here, right, we reordered these, we changed this language. So the track changes are all things that we discussed
Right.
during that time.
Yes, so Julia, where we landed then was that particular page now is reflecting our conversation. And now what we're ready to do is look at the outcome measures for each of those different activities.
I think you're muted, Julia.
You talking to myself. That sounds great. Thank you for the overview. Do we want to start at activity 1 and talk about the outcomes we're looking for? Or do folks have a different place they'd like to start? Hearing nothing, let's start at 1. Okay, so the activity reads increase independence and transparency of use of force boards at DPD. The outcome measures that are listed here: expansion of community member pool to at least 5 people with set terms of service, publication of the names of community members in the pool, and a clear and consistent selection process for interested community members.
Like the outcomes, what is lacking for me is I do think that one particular person should be responsible, just because when you put full board, that leaves it to everybody else looking at everybody else. I'm not really clear personally, because I've never done this before, but how would we proceed with this particular piece? Is it talking with the chief and then pushing forward these 3 recommendations, or can somebody help me out in terms of how this actually happens?
Alfredo, were you going to say something?
Yeah. In terms of your first point, Rufina, I wanted to suggest that before we identify if who the like individual board member will lead specific activities, that we first go through them and
Okay.
then come back and revisit who we could identify, just to save us some time and have a broad
That's a good
understanding
point.
of what's
Good
there.
point. Yeah.
And then for your second point, Julia, if you could touch on that.
Yeah. I think there are 2 mechanisms of action here. I think one is, continued conversations with the chief about this. And then the second, I think, is continued public awareness of the changes that have or have not been made. I might also push for the use of force board or the OIM publishing aggregate data on how much or how often the use of force board actually votes or rules. I don't know what the right word is there, but when the use of force board says that actually this is an inappropriate use of force versus when they say it is an appropriate use of force. I think some transparency into the efficacy of that board in terms of not just sort of blanket, it's all good kind of rulings, I think is valuable to the community. And of course, this is very much a deliberative process, and it's a step in a bigger process. So I don't know that we would say like, yes, Julia was, investigated for a use of force incident, and Julia was, it confirmed that Julia, but I do think, at an annual basis, understanding how many reviews did they do and what proportion of those reviews are found to be inappropriate versus appropriate uses of force.
So are you saying another outcome measure would be publication of statistics regarding the use of force review board and okay. Yeah,
like aggregate statistics? Because one of the concerns that the board has had in the past is that the use of force board almost never views use of force as inappropriate. And so,
Right.
you know,
Mhm.
is that actually functional as a board, or is that
A rubber stamp.
Rubber stamp. Mhm.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a really good point around what kind of transparency are we looking for?
Mhm.
And what are those performance indicators that lead us to believe that there's actually increased independence and transparency?
Right.
Right. Okay, great.
Okay. Any other changes to this area?
Let's see, just for my own understanding, is the norm now that those names of community members on the use of force board are not available?
That's correct.
Okay,
Or not publicly available, at least.
gotcha. And, okay, got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Are they being considered confidential? Is that what you mean about not being publicly available?
I don't
If
think
someone
so.
were to file an official records request, I don't know that the names could be withheld as confidential, but they have not been shared publicly.
Is there a reason for that?
Not that we know of.
Okay.
I mean, part of the goal here is that other boards where community members participate as part of the city process, those members are noted, and it's not some sort of like secret club. And so in this case, you know, our information suggests that the members on this board have been on the board for quite some time, in some cases, and are particularly warm to the police department, and so are not quite independent in their reviews. And there's not a rotating set, which is actually what the charter requires. And it doesn't follow a typical process by which community members are selected for the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Julia. And if we're able to flag specific ordinances or specific like written policy as we go through the different outcomes or activities, um, I think could make our strategic plan even stronger. That it's
That's
not just
great.
in that we are wanting, but that we're flagging specific instances in which there needs to be specific alignment with code and ordinance.
That's great. Yeah, not a wild idea on our part. It's just asking for compliance with basic city processes
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
law. Yeah, okay, that's great.
Exactly.
Okay, so Daniel, if you can take note on that, that's good.
Yep.
And so noted, for the leader piece, Daniel, because we're gonna come back to this, could you just put a question mark on that? On the leader piece? Okay.
Okay, the next activity, expand access to information necessary to fulfill the COB and OIM's mission of oversight and accountability. Outcome measures would be OIM gains access to DPD body camera footage of use of force incidents. OIM maintains access to DSD body camera footage of use of force incidents, and OIM maintains access to DPD stop data. And then that kind of nuance, I think, on the first outcome measure is that the OIM has access to use of force incidents that are shared with them, but they don't have unfettered access to the use of force data. Is that correct, Daniel?
Yeah, the OIM has access to what is shared with them intentionally. It is not an automatic process for use of force data. So at this point, it's if there's a use of force and there is a complaint that is filed, the OIM would have they would share that any files associated with that incident that was being complained about. That would be shared with the OIM, reacting to that complaint. The OIM does not have sort of proactive, regular access to all uses of forces, even where, you know, maybe there wasn't a complaint filed. Yeah,
I guess too, in my mind, this should be broader because the OIM does not only respond to use of force, it responds to other disciplinary actions. And in my mind, unfettered access to information is unfettered access to information. So conversation we've been having is about body cam footage, all the body cam footage. And the pushback we typically get is that there's a category of body cam footage that relates to the abuse of children. And that's sort of like max access level, if you will. And so the concern, and I feel personally, the red herring is that, well, we don't want, everybody sort of looking at these things, which are highly confidential and have an additional regulatory framework for them. Those could, in my mind, be flagged in the system, and they could be placed in a special status without creating the need to hold back all of the footage. And so in my mind, it's not really just about use of force, it's about the access to the body cam footage in general.
and just to expand on that, Julia, the board has, I think the board originally, I think maybe 2 years ago, was pushing for unfettered access to basically all footage in evidence.com. That's their database for body cam footage, halo camera footage, I think even security camera footage. It was then sort of focused a little bit on promptly sharing critical incident footage, which the DPD is doing now. And then sort of now the more recent focus has been specifically use of force footage, and trying to, at least get that. Not that we've necessarily stepped back and said, no, we're giving up on unfettered access to pretty much everything, except of course, the stuff related to, child sexual assault, which is legally has very strong restrictions on who can access that. I don't know that we've given up on that, but it's sort of been a little bit more focused lately. And so I just want to make sure that those are sort of 3 different categories of pushes.
Yeah, that's right. And a question to the board is, is a strategy ask for everything you want or ask specifically for the next step in what you want, right? Do you build up from each category or do you just sort of start with asking for the moon at this point? And, is the monitor's office going to be able to sort of probe into every piece of body cam footage? No, there's, thousands of hours of just, officers walking around doing nothing. And so, does that get them all of what they need for their work? Maybe, but also maybe creates, sort of a data dump that is more than they need. So I think the tactics here could be we've looked at critical incidents, we've gotten access to that, as use of force, the next category.
Yeah, I would advocate for something like that, Julia, around asking what is a scaffolded approach look like, where understanding that if they open up the fire hose, that is too much, but what's the next step in
Yeah.
accessing critical information?
Yeah, this would certainly be it in my mind. Use of force would be a good place to start. So.
Read.
Is
So
there a
I
way
guess
for us to flag
have
that kind of, oh, sorry, Tamisha, real quick. Is there a way for us to include in the outcomes or later on in the strategic plan nature that the OIM identify what that scaffolding looks like for receiving information?
Yeah, it's a activity or a sub-activity where we just say, what are the different categories that would be most useful?
Okay.
Tamisha, were you gonna say something?
Yes. So my question would be is how is that information, the footage separated? Is it all just in one big area or is it classified differently? Perhaps like a different group of officers do the child, handle the child issues, or they should be able to separate that out and give levels of access based on that. And the OIM can have should have unfederated access minus that, if that's an issue. If
I've
that's
made the same
only-
argument for years. Technology makes all of that possible, Tymisha. It's not a very complicated matter. So I'm
It's
with
just that
you on
I've
that.
been in that role for a quarter of a century, so I'm just like, I'm not understanding why is this an issue.
Although
I'm with you.
About
occasionally government databases do lag by about a quarter of a century, but that doesn't mean it's not possible.
It's entirely possible to tag the data, or, you know, we've dug into this a little bit over the years, and the functionality is there to certainly sort the information correctly. So, in fact, it's something that happens today with certain reports as it is.
Right. So I would probably reword. I think that we should have ongoing access, or the OIM should have ongoing access, and it shouldn't be as selective of what they're going to give to her. As we know that could be problematic, right?
Mhm.
That's just
So
my
maybe a
thoughts
middle
on that.
ground is to ask OIM for their sort of staged plan on this, and then confirm what's most useful to them as a starting place, or would they rather advocate for, you know, everything at once? How does that sound to folks?
I like it. Yeah, I like that.
I agree.
Yeah, likewise.
Now, can you articulate that, Daniel, into our outcome?
I think that's that's a step to help us
I think
determine
so.
what the outcome should be. So I'll
I think
just
that's right.
send that email, and we
Okay.
can have that conversation.
Yep. Okay.
Terrific.
Let's move to activity 3, oversee implementation of recommendations from the disciplinary process review audit. The outcomes would be prompt implementation of all accepted recommendations in the city auditor's pending report. Good faith follow-up conversations between COB, OIM, and Department of Safety regarding any findings or recommendations from the city auditor's pending report that were not accepted by any party. So having been the subject of government audits, sometimes the recommendations are financially unfeasible, and it takes a couple of cycles to get the budget you need to actually do the work. And so I wouldn't want, at least on the OIM side, folks to feel that this is punitive in any way. There's also a chance that, you know, they disagree with a lot of, and I see that we have all accepted, but I might want to wordsmith that a little bit, because sometimes the recommendations don't align with budget and other priorities. So change between to amongst.
Amongst.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would
Go ahead,
I would
Tamisha.
suggest more, instead of saying a good faith follow-up conversation, would be maybe a phased approach for implementation, to ensuring that it has been completed or implemented. Since there could be fiscal constraints, I think that not giving a hard deadline, but maybe like 3 deadlines, 4 percentages, I guess, an ongoing.
Yeah. I guess the reverse of this is, it's unclear who is going to be subject to the recommendations there. Is it the OIM? Is that the EDOS? Is it the different departments? The board itself might receive recommendations. And so maybe we could just clarify. I think we want Department of Safety to implement recommendations that are made. The same would be true about budgets, but I think maybe distinguishing between the recipient of those recommendations might be important here.
And
Yeah.
to your earlier point, Julia, are we looking for a plan more than prompt implementation if there's a reason implementation needs to be delayed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that, Larry, around not only a plan, but tracking the implementation of it and being able to tell us where they're at in the process and what are those hangups, and how then we can continue to support that.
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe it's an implementation plan and a monitoring approach or transparency into the implementation or something like that.
Right. I would say implementing a POAM process so a plan of action. And that gives them stages on how they're going to do it, that they can commit to, whether it's us, OIM, or the DOS. But that provides accountability and tracking as well.
Yeah.
And it's easy to follow through later on.
A question I
doesn't get
might
lost
ask
in
the
the weeds.
board too is, do we want to be involved in the prioritization of recommendations with these departments at all? Or would we want them to pick what they do first, second, or third?
I don't think we've got that kind of time or bandwidth to do that in addition to what we're trying to accomplish in other areas. So I would just let them, with the monitoring piece, we, be checking in, but I don't want to get into the prioritization piece.
A follow-up question, Julia, I think would be understanding our limited capacity that you raised, Rufina. How do we guard against the potential for them to just delay,
Right.
or put things all the way to the bottom of the list that we know to be really vital?
Yeah.
Well, have we seen, I mean, is this the first time that this kind of an audit is being done, and this is our first instance of having to do this kind of activity?
The last audit was like 11 or 12 years ago. So it's been a really long time.
It was 2011.
2011. Oh yeah, I guess that's 14 years ago at this point. Time flies.
Well,
We can
I
certainly
think
send
we-
that around so folks
I
have.
think we enter this in good faith, expecting them to hopefully have similar prioritization than what we would have, but I don't know. I'm not interested in the prioritization piece, given the other work that we've got to do. That's just my feeling about it.
Does the city's auditor report come with a level of prioritization, or do they just give them all the recommendations and they're then free to choose when and how to implement them?
Usually it comes as this kind of multi-step report. So they will provide their findings to the department. The department will respond to the findings. And so you have different dispositions to the findings. Those might be like, we disagree or we agree. And so then they come back and there's a little bit of a, back and forth on that. They might disagree with the finding itself. They might disagree with the recommendation as a result of the finding. And so there's sort of steps there as well. And then at some point, the city auditor or the auditor just publishes the report based on that, and depends on the kind of audit. But sometimes they include the city's disposition against that. And sometimes that's a separate document. But those are all public documents either way.
And
Gotcha.
typically, if the department accepts one of the recommendations, they also will provide an estimated implementation date.
Okay.
But it could be like, Julia is wearing a pink sweater, and the response could be, and as a result, she should be wearing a red sweater. And they could say, no, this sweater is purple. And as a result, she should be wearing a mauve sweater. Like there's sort of like multiple things that you could have commentary on as sort of how that goes through. I feel like the monitoring is not an outcome. And so I'd like that to be a little bit more concrete. And I also feel like good faith is not an outcome. So I want to push us to things that might be measurable. I wish good faith was measurable. That sounds nice. Any other changes to this? Okay, I'm just keeping mindful of time too. Activity number 4, enhance oversight and transparency of Denver Health's performance in providing medical care to incarcerated persons outcome measures, creation of a public data dashboard for various Denver Health performance metrics, increased visibility for DSD into findings and complaints against Denver Health staff, and ability for the city to require Denver Health's cooperation with non-disciplinary after action reports following serious incidents to ensure that root causes are identified and addressed.
These are all things that I mean, I was tasked with drafting outcome measures. So these are things that the board has discussed at various points. But whether or not we even want all of these to be specific outcome measures is open for debate.
The one that gives me pause, only because we're not at all at the table for the negotiation, is the third thing. So the city negotiates its contract annually with Denver Health, and it's this very closed door process. And so that feels like far removed from our actual access to me. I think it's meaningful, but I just wonder how we would hope that happen.
Yeah, that was a concern too, as you were reading this, Julia, is that it feels that even city council doesn't have access to some of
Right.
these things, or they're not even able to push for this. That how do we get our foot in the door when it's shut to even people that arguably should have access to this?
Yeah. And maybe we get to the third thing by the first two, right? We've got public data. We can show how many issues there are, what kind of categories they're in. And we push for DSD to dig into those, you know, and then we sort of understand what access or resistance they have to solving problems. So I guess my suggestion would be to remove the third, but focus on the first two.
Okay.
I like it. I just don't know how we could do it. Any disagreement with that approach?
Not necessarily a disagreement, Julia, but still thinking that this is really important.
Totally.
Is there somewhere else where we could flag this as a concern that is above our pay grade, if you will? But putting it out there that this is something that needs to be addressed by whomever has the authority, and at least putting it out there in public that this is an area of concern.
Maybe what we do is I think there's opportunity for us to have context around each of these, and we highlight this as sort of the overarching, you know, goal that we want, that if there are systems issues, they're addressed, and that the city has the recourse necessary to do that. So maybe we can make that more context that is stated, and then we don't forget about it.
I like that. I think that where we're able to provide context to our activities or our measures, that we do so that we build on that institutional knowledge that's been so vital, as we've discussed in our retreat, and be able to identify the thinking behind our decision making and strategic decisions.
I think that's a decent segue into annual report conversations that we can have as well about, do we want this to be a recommendation? We can have recommendations in our annual report that are not in the strategic plan.
That's true.
If we want. And
Yeah, and that would be following up on recommendations we made in previous years.
In the annual report. The annual report is all context.
Okay. Oh, yeah, and I'm looking at time. So do we have the opportunity, folks, to shift over to the annual report just really quickly for a few minutes?
Yeah.
Daniel, do you want to just highlight the typical process we have here? And I think the outcome I would be looking for in this conversation is a volunteer to work with Daniel on early drafts. I know Tymisha has done it in the past, but there might be somebody else who wants to step into that.
Give me the timeline again, as to when all this is happening.
Very soon. So the annual report is by ordinance due on March 15th, on or before March 15th. This year, March 15th is a Saturday, so we will probably issue it on the 14th, Friday. The,
You can't go to the Monday?
We could. I
Go
don't
to
think we're gonna get
Monday.
sued if it's on a Monday versus a Friday, so I think we're probably okay.
we typically try to get a very presentable version of the report out to stakeholders in public safety and with the OIM about 2 weeks prior. So we would give them a week to look at it, review it, perhaps provide corrections or feedback, and then we would have 1 week to incorporate that before the publication. So that's the end of February, beginning of March is when we want to have a presentable report. I am currently working on a first draft of the report. I'm hoping to have it done by Tuesday of next week. My goal is typically to overwrite the first draft so that board members can. It's always easier to cut than it is to go back and write more. And so I tend to overwrite it and say, include as many recommendations as I can think of that would be reasonable. Include the different concerns that I've heard the board raise over the year. And then, as it goes through the editing and review process, we can cut out things that are like, oh yeah, we were concerned about that, but maybe that's not annual report level, or maybe we don't need to spend a whole page on that. Maybe that's a 2-paragraph kind of a thing. And so that's sort of the editing process that happens in February. There's also the editing portion, and then actual board work is the assessment of the OIM effectiveness, which I don't draft and sort of leave that section. I prepare sort of the data side of that, so the data from the OIM's workload as well as the various surveys that we do, and then using that data, the board is then responsible for deciding how they want to assess the effectiveness sort of subjectively and overall.
Okay, thank you.
I'd be happy to help, Daniel.
Great. I will follow up with you, Alfredo.
Thanks. And typically what happens is we have a good confirmation meeting that board members feel comfortable with all the recommendations in their tone and approach. We can say things with a hammer, we can also say things with a feather. And so, we usually have to kind of get with ourselves and say, which case is this? And that's usually a good conversation. So let's make sure, Daniel, that we earmark a board meeting at the appropriate time for that, just so we have enough time. Okay.
Sure.
Anything else on the annual report? And I don't know if it'd be helpful for us to send around last year's, just so people can kind of see what that looks like if you don't remember.
Sure. I'll send out, I think by next week, I'll send out a link to our last year's annual report as well as the draft of this year's. And board members don't necessarily have to go through with a fine-tooth comb like Alfredo and I will initially, but it can give you, if you want to skim it and just sort of get if you have any high-level recommendations of like, oh yeah, that, we don't need to talk that much about this, or you completely forgot this other thing. I can send out the draft, sort of a no obligations draft.
No obligations, annual report draft.
Except for all.
It will become your obligations shortly, but just not yet. Okay, that sounds good. Any questions from board members on that? Okay. With that, I understand that our meeting with the chief of police will cover matters of ongoing and open policy development. And so would ask the board for a motion to move into executive session. And
So moved.
thank you.
Indeed.
He hasn't joined us yet, so I'm not sure if he might be a couple minutes after 12 if we want to keep using time.
Do you think he'll join us here, or do you think he'll join us at the other link?
I asked him to join us here because I wasn't sure
Okay.
when he would join.
Okay, well, we'll
we
just
can
keep
there
going
then.
then.
And I'm going to be
Um,
joining by phone, so you won't see me
Okay.
now.
Okay, and I know, Tymisha, you wanted to kind of do a little bit of prep for that meeting. We'll have to be careful about what we talk about, not in executive session there.
We could go to executive session now if you want. I can ping them and let them know just to join directly if we want to start having those privileged conversations.
Let's do that.
Yeah, I would prefer that if we're gonna prep for that.
Okay. Let's go ahead and meet in executive session. See y'all there.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.